I saw the pen before I saw his face. It was my father's favorite Mont Blanc, the one he only brought out for contracts and checks. It lay carefully unscrewed beside the folded pages of a legal document, right there on the table next to the wedding cake. That's how I knew. He wasn't here to walk me down the aisle. He came to rewrite his will. My name is Elise. I'm 31. And on what should have been the most joyful day of my life, I learned my father was willing to humiliate me in front of 112 people just to protect a lie he'd been hiding for years. It happened quietly, almost clinically, the way betrayal often does when it's been practiced for a long time. He didn't pull me aside. He didn't look me in the eye. He just handed a pen to my younger cousin, the same cousin who grew up sleeping on my floor during family reunions, and said, "Just sign at the bottom. Your mother and I agreed, this is best for the family." The family. That word used to mean something. I should have been thinking about the ceremony. About James, my soon-to-be husband, who was nervously pacing outside the barn doors, probably wondering if I'd gotten cold feet. I should have been adjusting my veil or taking a last sip of champagne or laughing with my bridesmaids. But instead, I stood frozen in the catering prep area, veil in hand, while the lawyer, yes, the lawyer, sat with a folder of papers on his lap, waiting for a nod from my father. My mother wouldn't meet my gaze. "Why today?" I asked her, low, controlled. "Why would you bring this here?" She glanced at the flower arrangements as if the lilies could offer an escape. "Because everyone's already here," she said. "It's convenient. And honestly, Elise, this could be a fresh start for everyone." A fresh start. As if my life was some cluttered living room they were redecorating. I wasn't born into dysfunction. It took years to grow this deep. And I had spent most of my 20s convincing myself I could rise above it. I'd worked hard, put myself through school, earned every promotion, saved every cent that went into paying for this wedding myself. James offered, but I refused. I didn't want any debts between us. I didn't want to owe anyone for the one day that was supposed to be mine. Now here was my father. Suit tailored, expression neutral, rewriting the script behind my back. He was transferring half of what was meant for me to someone else. Not a stranger. Not a charity. But someone I had trusted. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The ceremony was delayed. Guests milled around in their linen suits and pastel dresses, sipping sparkling water and fanning themselves under the old oak tree. They didn't know. Not yet. But they would. Because I wasn't going to let this pass quietly. Not today. Not anymore. I took the folder from the lawyer's lap without asking. Read the first few lines. Inheritance reassignment. Contingency clauses. Signatures pending. It was exactly what I feared. And somehow, worse. Because right there, at the bottom of page 2, was a name I hadn't expected. My sister's. Emily. The golden one. The girl who cried her way out of consequences. The one who had burned through 3 apartments, 5 cars, and 2 business startups funded by my parents while I counted pennies in New York just to keep my lights on. She was getting everything. And I was getting a promise. A verbal assurance that someday, when things settle, my share would be restored. I should have felt anger. I should have felt rage. But instead, I felt stillness. A hollow, echoing stillness that comes only after years of being the daughter who never demanded too much. "You've already signed this," I said, looking up at my father. He nodded, buttoning his jacket. "It's done." And something in me, that last tether to decency, to hope, unhooked. Outside, the music cued. The ceremony was ready. The violinist began the soft prelude I had chosen months ago. My best friend peeked in from the side entrance. "Elise, they're waiting." I handed her the veil. "I need 5 minutes," I said. 5 minutes was all I needed. Because I wasn't going to be the good daughter anymore. And what happened next made sure none of them would forget this wedding for the rest of their lives. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal. It was realizing I wasn't even surprised. Somewhere deep down, I'd known. Maybe not the details, not the signatures and clauses and clean legal language, but the truth had been rising in me like a tide for years. And now it had finally reached my mouth. I stepped into the hallway, heels echoing against the polished concrete, the folder still in my hands. No one tried to stop me. The lawyer looked down. My mother busied herself with her bracelet. And my father, the man who once carried me on his shoulders at the county fair, adjusted his tie as if preparing for a conference call, not the ceremony of his eldest daughter. Outside, the music had shifted to the second movement. That meant I had less than 3 minutes. I walked out into the light. People turned. There was a ripple of recognition, followed by a collective pause. I knew how I must have looked, bridal dress half-buttoned, makeup beginning to wilt under the sun, no bouquet. No smile. A hush settled over the courtyard. James stood at the altar, his eyes scanning my face. He looked afraid to move. I felt a pang of guilt for involving him in this. But I couldn't marry into a lie while the ink dried on a betrayal 2 feet away from our wedding cake. I stopped in front of the guests. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply said, I just need a moment. I promise I'll make it brief. There was a beat of confusion. Then silence again. Behind me, I heard the door creak open. My father had stepped outside. I didn't turn to look. I held up the folder. This was delivered to me just now. It's a legal amendment to my father's will. A redistribution of assets. Effective today. A few people exchanged glances. Some looked away. My aunt shifted in her seat. My cousin, the one who had signed, fidgeted with her purse. I won't bore you with details. But this wasn't supposed to be about money. This was supposed to be about family. I paused. The only sound was the wind moving through the oak leaves above us. I worked for every part of this wedding. Every cent. Every call, every plan. I didn't ask for anything. I didn't expect much. But I didn't expect this. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. I expected it to. My eyes found Emily. My sister had just arrived, fashionably late as always. She stood at the edge of the crowd, expression unreadable behind designer sunglasses. She knew. Of course she did. I lowered the folder to my side. We'll resume in a few minutes. Thank you for your patience. Then I turned and walked back inside. Not a sound followed me. Even the music had stopped. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall, pressing my fingertips to my temples. My heart pounded, not with adrenaline, but with something deeper. A long-held ache. The ache of being treated as expendable by the people who taught me the meaning of loyalty. James came in through the side door. His tie was crooked. His hands were trembling slightly. Elise, what was that? I met his eyes. I needed them to know. He looked over my shoulder, then back at me. Are you okay? I nodded, then shook my head. Both were true. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Do you want to cancel? I didn't answer right away. My mind was still in that courtyard, replaying every flicker of discomfort on their faces. But behind the discomfort, there had been recognition. A tiny spark of shame. Maybe for the first time, they saw me not as a daughter. Not as a dutiful fixture in their life. But as someone who could stand in the sun and tell the truth. I turned back toward the prep room. My veil was still on the chair. The stylist had left. Someone had taken the champagne. I whispered. No. We're getting married. He exhaled softly. Then he reached for my hand, held it tightly, and didn't let go. It took us 10 minutes to reassemble. Someone restarted the music. The guests were quieter now, more alert. They watched me not with politeness, but with uncertainty. Like they were waiting to see what I'd do next. We said our vows. They were simple, unscripted, honest. James's voice trembled on the word respect, and mine caught slightly on partnership. But we meant every syllable. There was no grand kiss at the end, just a quiet embrace under a late afternoon sky. Afterward, during the reception, people kept their distance. Some offered cautious compliments. Others didn't meet my eye at all. My father disappeared. My mother sat stiffly near the bar, nursing a white wine she barely sipped. Emily finally approached, sometime around sunset. She said, "That was dramatic." I replied, "No. That was restraint." She looked down at the wineglass in her hand. "You didn't have to embarrass them." I tilted my head. "But I did. And I'm not sorry." Her lip curled, just slightly. That same smirk I'd grown up with. The one she used when cornered. She said nothing else. Just walked away, her dress whispering across the stone as she moved back into the shadows. Later that night, after most of the guests had gone, I found the folder again. I hadn't thrown it away. I couldn't. Because I wasn't finished yet. It wasn't just about what they'd done. It was about what I was going to do next. Betrayal doesn't stop when the guests go home. It lingers. Quietly. Like perfume on borrowed clothing. That night, after the lights dimmed and the caterers packed up the last uneaten slices of cake, I sat cross-legged on the floor of our honeymoon suite, still in my dress. The zipper scratched against my back every time I shifted. My scalp ached where the veil had once been pinned. But I didn't move. I just kept turning the pages. James had fallen asleep on the couch. He hadn't asked any more questions, only squeezed my hand after the drive back from the venue and told me I didn't owe him an explanation tonight. I loved him for that. But this wasn't over. Not for me. The folder smelled faintly of cologne, my father's, of course. The pages were crisp, professionally bound, bearing the sterile perfection only betrayal could make feel so offensive. Page 5 was the heart of it. Clause 4. 3. Reallocation of the marital trust, effectively shifting all property and controlling interest in the business, my father's consulting firm, to Emily. Retroactive to last quarter. He didn't just change the will. He rewrote history. My name had been scratched out of the estate plans entirely, with one exception, a vague future distribution subject to conditions, none of which were defined. It was legal limbo. A gesture, not a promise. And it had happened fast. Too fast. The last draft I'd seen, accidentally, on my mother's desk months ago, still listed me as a primary beneficiary. I remembered the look she gave me when I pointed it out. "Oh, that's just a placeholder," she had said. "You know your father's always tinkering." I didn't believe her then. But I didn't push. I didn't want to seem greedy. Now I realized that silence had been my first mistake. The next morning, I woke early. James stirred but didn't say much. He knew me well enough to recognize when I was assembling something invisible in my head, like scaffolding. I moved slowly, purposefully. I ironed a blouse. Braided my hair back. Ate toast standing up. Then I called a car and went home. Not the apartment James and I had shared for 3 years. I mean home. The old house. The white one on Alder Lane with the cracked porch step that was never fixed. The place where my father built his firm, where Emily kept her first bottle of nail polish hidden behind the bathroom mirror, where I learned to read by reciting legal memos out loud to my stuffed bear. The house was locked, but I still had a key. Inside, everything smelled of linen spray and wood polish. The kitchen hadn't changed. Neither had the framed photo of the 4 of us in front of the Grand Canyon, despite the fact that I was cropped slightly out of center. I went straight to the office. It was exactly as I remembered. Dark mahogany desk. brass lamps. Bookshelves filled with reference manuals, all untouched. But the desk drawer, that was where he kept the real documents. Not the official copies. The drafts. The outlines. The notes. It wasn't locked. He never bothered to lock it. Not from me. Inside, I found 5 folders, stacked like a timeline. I opened the one dated 9 months ago. There it was, an early version of the revised will. My name still intact. Equal shares. Detailed provisions for business succession, complete with a contingency plan naming me co-director in the event of his illness. Then, in the margins, a single line, handwritten in blue ink. Emily better positioned to maintain reputation. I read that sentence 3 times. Better positioned. Not better qualified. Not more committed. Just, more palatable. More photogenic. Easier to explain to shareholders. A golden daughter who looked right on paper. I sat in the desk chair, arms crossed over my ribs, and let the weight of it settle. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't about love either. It was about optics. And I had never fit the image. The pressure started immediately after the wedding. It arrived in the form of silence. My mother stopped returning texts. My father sent one email, "Let's allow some space for tensions to cool." Emily blocked me on Instagram. Even James's mother, God bless her, called me after church that week and said in a soft, regretful voice, "Elise, your father's a complicated man. Maybe just let it go, for the sake of peace." Peace was never the problem. What they wanted was obedience. Even James, supportive as he was, couldn't fully understand. What would winning even look like? He asked one night over dinner. I didn't answer him. Because it wasn't about winning. It was about not disappearing. I went back to the office again the following week. This time, during business hours. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. The receptionist blinked when she saw me, unsure whether to greet me formally or avoid eye contact altogether. I gave her a polite nod and walked straight into the conference room without knocking. My father was there. So was his business partner. And the same lawyer from the wedding. They froze. I didn't sit. "You submitted these revisions without notifying me. That violates our agreement." My father cleared his throat. "Elise, we had to act in the best interest of the firm. And frankly, after your behavior." My behavior? "You tried to alter my future during the most important moment of my life." The lawyer intervened. "These documents have been reviewed and ratified." I held up the earlier draft I'd found in the drawer. This one wasn't. And this draft proves intent. There was a beat of tension. Then the lawyer asked, quietly, "What do you want?" I looked at my father. His expression was unreadable. Maybe for the first time, I scared him a little. I replied, "I want access. To all versions. All amendments. All records." He opened his mouth. I added, "Or I go public. With everything. Not emotionally. Not dramatically. Just factually. Legally. In writing." His partner swore under his breath. The lawyer nodded once. My father stared at me for a long time. Then, finally, he said, "Fine." By the time I left the building, the sky had turned silver. It was one of those February days that doesn't decide if it wants to snow or rain, so it does both in half measures. I didn't use an umbrella. I liked the sting. My phone buzzed on the drive back. A message from my mother. "We didn't mean for it to hurt you." It didn't even make me angry. It just made me tired. Back at the apartment, James was in the kitchen making tea. He looked up when I came in, his eyes careful. "Did it help?" he asked. I replied. "It started something." I didn't tell him what I found. Not yet. Because what came next would require more than truth. It would require precision. And I wasn't done digging. People think revenge feels hot. Like fire. Like rage. But real revenge, quiet revenge, feels cold. Like steel drawn slowly from its sheath. I didn't tell James what I planned to do. Not because I didn't trust him. I did. But because something about this part, this cold, methodical part, felt too private. Too heavy with old bruises and calculations I hadn't let myself run until now. So I started small. In the evenings, while he read or fell asleep watching documentaries, I would sit at my desk with the overhead light turned low. I gathered everything I had ever signed, witnessed, or been mentioned in, from shareholder agreements to notarized amendments to internal business correspondence where I was CC'd more out of obligation than inclusion. I opened a spreadsheet and created categories: date, author, beneficiary, clauses affected, signature chain. I traced every paper trail like a thread through the fabric they tried to knot behind my back. One detail, alone, means little. But enough of them together? They start to form a pattern. A pattern my father never thought I'd be able, or willing, to see. Week 2. I requested access to the company's archival database. Not through official channels. That would have raised flags. I used my consulting credentials from 2 years prior, when I'd helped modernize their invoicing systems. Technically, my access had expired, but someone had forgotten to remove me. A minor oversight. I found a trove of documents buried in version history folders. Drafts that never made it to print. Notes Emily had sent directly to the legal team. Emails labeled internal use only with her name copied first, mine last, if at all. That's when I saw it. A clause she'd proposed 6 months ago. If Elise insists on retaining beneficiary rights, suggest placing her share in a conditional trust, subject to behavioral review or family board vote. Behavioral review. They wanted to make my inheritance dependent on my manners. I sat back in the chair, the glow of the screen cold against my face. I didn't cry. I printed the email, labeled it, and placed it in the red file. The one I kept separate from the rest. The one I would not use unless I had to. A few days later, I called Clara. Clara was my grandfather's lawyer. Retired now. Semi-blind, fully sharp. She had known my family for 40 years and had been quietly replaced when my father decided she was too old-fashioned for modern estate strategy. She still answered on the first ring. Elise, darling. I wondered when I'd hear from you. Her voice was slow, deliberate, but never unsure. I need a favor, I said. There was a pause. Then, are we doing this the discreet way or the effective way? Both, I said. If possible. She laughed. My favorite kind. We met the following morning at her garden flat on Riverton Lane. The kind of place that smelled like dried lavender and legal ink. Clara poured me coffee and let me talk. I showed her the drafts, the emails, the folder. She listened without interruption. When I finished, she nodded slowly. They're not just rewriting you out. They're repositioning you as a liability. If that gets baked into the documents, you'll lose standing to contest anything. It's smart. And brutal. I stared at the steam rising from my coffee. Can I stop it? Clara leaned back in her chair. That depends. Are you willing to play the long game? I've been playing it my whole life. The next part required patience. It also required pretending. So I reached out to my mother first. She was cautious but civil. We met for brunch on the pretense of catching up. I wore a soft green sweater she once said brought out my eyes. I let her choose the restaurant. I didn't order alcohol. I let her talk. She said things like your father regrets how things happened, and we just want to keep the family together. I nodded, smiling faintly, tracing the rim of my coffee cup with my thumb. I just want to understand, I said. Her voice softened. That's all we ever wanted too. The lie sat there between us like a third plate. I didn't argue. I let her leave the table believing she'd made progress. She hadn't. But I had. I'd recorded the entire conversation. Not for court. Not yet. But for me. For the clarity. Because the more I heard her voice wrapping betrayal in silk, the less it felt like my fault. Next was Emily. That took longer. She ignored my texts. Declined my calls. Posted vague captions about boundaries and healing while posing in curated loungewear beside imported candles. So I went to her directly. She answered the door in a robe and sunglasses, even though it was nearly 6 p.m. What do you want? To talk. She glanced over her shoulder. The sound of music drifted from somewhere deeper in the house. 5 minutes. I stepped inside. Everything smelled expensive and impersonal. Like money that had never been earned. I kept it short. You coordinated this with Dad. The revisions. The board votes. The drafts. She crossed her arms. So? So I know what you've done. She smiled. Then you also know it's too late. I looked around the space. The art. The fixtures. The custom molding she hadn't paid for. None of this is yours. She laughed. None of it was yours either. I didn't flinch. Not yet. Then I left. That night, I filed 3 preliminary motions. Not full challenges. Not lawsuits. Just enough to freeze any financial movement related to the contested documents. I didn't even do it through Clara. I used another lawyer, quiet, efficient, apolitical. No history with my family. They wouldn't know until the requests were acknowledged in probate. I waited. The notice came through 2 days later. And 30 minutes after that, my father called. I let it go to voicemail. He didn't leave one. James found me on the balcony later that evening. He said, "You've been quieter than usual." I answered, "That's because I'm listening." He nodded, not asking what for. Instead, he asked something else. "Are you sure you want to keep going with this?" I turned to face him. "I don't have a choice." He touched my wrist lightly, fingers cool against my skin. "Yes, you do. You could walk away." I didn't look away. That's what they want. For me to be the kind of person who disappears. He was quiet for a moment. Then said, "I'll stand beside you. No matter what." I kissed his hand. Then I went inside, opened the red folder again, and circled one date near the bottom. It was Emily's birthday. And also the date of a major transfer. I highlighted it. Because that was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment I would use to burn everything down. Quietly. With proof. There's a strange calm that settles over you when you stop asking for permission to be angry. It's not fire. It's ice. And when it sets in, you stop waiting for people to explain themselves. You simply act. Emily's birthday had always been a performance. A curated spectacle of good lighting, floral arrangements, and over-rehearsed sentiment. But this year, it came with something else, an account transfer made in the early hours of the morning, 1 minute past midnight. $2. 4 million. Shifted quietly from one of the holding companies into a new trust. In her name. It was the key. I knew it as soon as I saw the timestamp. The date wasn't random, it was planned. Just like everything else in the last 6 months. This transfer wasn't ceremonial. It was tactical. And it was my opening. The confrontation was set for the following Thursday. Not at home. Not at the firm. Not even at a restaurant, where everyone could pretend to play nice for the sake of appearance. I chose Clara's office. Neutral ground. Controlled environment. No interruptions. My father arrived first. He wore his courtroom tie, the navy one with the discreet silver thread. My mother trailed behind him, tight-lipped and overdressed. Emily entered last, sunglasses on, as if shielding herself from a world that had begun to see her clearly. I didn't offer coffee. I didn't smile. Clara began. We're here today to clarify Elise's position in regard to the disputed amendments. There will be no interruptions, no justifications. Just truth. No one spoke. Not yet. I opened my folder. The red one. On March 12, a transfer was executed from Lornhill Holdings into a secondary trust, established under the name E. Hathaway Strategic Fund. Emily flinched. I continued. The entity was formed 1 week prior. The authorization came from the board. But the original clause preventing that kind of movement, Clause 6. 4 of the succession agreement, was still legally active until the following quarter. Which means the transfer wasn't just unethical. It was premature. And therefore, challengeable. My father leaned forward. Elise, we don't need to turn this into. Into what? I asked. A reckoning? He hesitated. I could see the shift in his posture. The quiet calculation of a man used to being 2 steps ahead suddenly realizing he'd tripped. It was a gift, he said finally. A symbolic gesture. Clara raised her brow. A symbolic gesture that bypassed legal protections and asset limitations? My mother crossed her arms. This isn't what family is supposed to be about. I turned to her. Then why did you come to my wedding with lawyers? The silence that followed was the closest thing to honesty I'd ever heard from her. I laid out the rest. Email correspondence. Time-stamped messages. Contract drafts. Emily's name on 6 of them. You built this whole structure to make it look like I was stepping away. Like I didn't want responsibility. But you never asked me. You never even offered. You decided. Emily said, low. You were never going to fit into this world. I looked at her carefully. I built half of it while you were in Mykonos. She didn't reply. My father tried again. We were trying to protect what we created. Then you should have protected the truth. Clara leaned forward, speaking carefully. Here's what's going to happen. Elise will be reinstated as beneficiary, effective immediately. Any transfers made under the March 12 clause will be flagged and reprocessed. Full audit trail disclosure within 14 business days. My father's mouth twitched. And if we refuse? I didn't blink. Then I release everything. Not just to the probate judge. To the press. To your partners. To the regulatory board. Emily laughed once, short and bitter. You'd burn the whole thing down just to win? I looked her straight in the eye. No. I'd burn it down because you made me light the match. They left 20 minutes later. Not defeated. But unsettled. My father didn't speak to me. My mother touched my shoulder briefly on her way out, a half apology that landed like ash. Emily didn't look back. Clara turned to me after the door closed. That was surgical. I sat very still. I didn't want it to be. She nodded. But it had to be. That night, I sat on the floor of our living room with my back against the couch and listened to the recording again. Not of the meeting, but of my mother's brunch, the one where she'd said they just wanted to keep the family together. Her voice sounded so soft in that clip. So rehearsed. It didn't even make me angry anymore. It just made things clear. James came home late. He paused in the doorway, sensing the shift in me. It's done? He asked. Not quite. But the door's closing. He walked over, crouched in front of me. You okay? I nodded slowly. I think I'm starting to be. He didn't try to fix it. He just sat beside me in the quiet. A few days later, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside, a single piece of paper. No letterhead. Just one sentence. You've made your point. I folded it once and placed it in the back of the red folder. Because this wasn't about a point. It was about principle. And now, finally, the balance was shifting. But there was still one thing I had to do. Not for revenge. For resolution. The fallout didn't come all at once. It came slowly, like rust spreading across something once polished. At first, there was just quiet. Not peace, never peace, but a sort of static silence. No calls. No emails. Not even from the family accountant, who used to reply within 6 hours, no matter what. I didn't chase it. I let the silence speak. And then, like a crack in glass, the consequences began to show. 14 business days passed. The audit I requested arrived by courier in 2 thick envelopes, both signed and sealed in unassuming white packaging. Clara came over to help me review them, setting up her glasses and legal pads like she was back in court again. She had already marked the key sections before she arrived. Here, she said, tapping one column. This is what you'll want to lean on. 3 trust reassignments were rolled back. The March 12th transfer was formally reversed, the funds placed in a neutral holding account pending final division. It wasn't just money. It was position. Authority. Standing. And for the first time in 2 years, my name appeared where it should have been all along, next to successor, not under alternate. I didn't celebrate. I just read the line again and again until the words blurred slightly. James brought me a glass of water, set it down, and left the room without a word. He understood what even I hadn't said out loud yet. This wasn't winning. This was surviving. News spreads in wealthy circles like perfume, fast, artificial, and impossible to ignore. By the end of the month, 3 of my father's former clients had pulled out of their legacy contracts. One sent a formal letter of concern about governance ethics. The local business journal published a 3-paragraph piece noting the surprising restructuring of the Hathaway Trust, though they left names out. They didn't have to name anyone. Everyone knew. My father called twice. I didn't answer. He stopped trying after the 3rd. Emily did what she always did, curated the narrative. She posted photos from a wellness retreat in Sedona. Pictures of sage bundles, barefoot hikes, and soft white robes under filtered sun. The captions were longer than usual. Sometimes, healing means letting go of narratives that were never yours to hold. I didn't respond. I just saved the post. Because eventually, someone would ask how things got to this point. And I wanted every receipt. My mother sent a letter. Not an email. A real letter. Handwritten in her ornate, slanted script. The kind she used for birthday cards and condolence notes. It was 2 pages long. Careful. Not quite apologetic, but steeped in the soft language of regret. She wrote. We didn't realize how much this would hurt you. That was never the intention. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Because that's the thing about people like her. They convince themselves that harm only matters if it's deliberate. As if bleeding from an accident doesn't count. I didn't reply. Clara and I met once more at her flat to close out the file. She'd drawn up a formal amendment acknowledging the revisions and reinforcing my rights within the estate, with triggers for dispute mediation and audit-proof terms. It was airtight. Beautiful in its finality. She passed it to me across the table. It's yours now. I signed it slowly. Thank you. She smiled gently. You did more than defend yourself, Elise. You changed the narrative. I tucked the signed copy into my briefcase. I didn't set out to change anything. I just refused to disappear. She nodded. Same thing, really. James and I took a weekend trip to the coast. It wasn't a honeymoon, just air, salt, and distance. We stayed in a quiet rental above the dunes. At night, I sat on the balcony and let the wind tangle my hair. He joined me on the last night, handing me a mug of tea. "You seem different," he said. I looked out at the dark line of the ocean, endless and quiet. "I think I finally believe myself." He didn't ask what I meant. He just reached for my hand. And for the first time in weeks, I felt still. The Monday after we returned, I went to the house. Not to talk. Not to confront. Just to see it. The lawn was still manicured. The porch light still clicked on when I stepped up the first stair. I used my key. It still worked. Inside, the air smelled the same: linen, cedar, faint lavender. But it didn't feel like mine anymore. I walked through the room slowly. Past the hall mirror where I used to check my backpack for forgotten lunch money. Past the bookshelf where I'd lined up awards no one ever dusted. In the study, my father's Mont Blanc pen was still in its glass holder. I stared at it for a long time. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. That pen had rewritten my future. But it hadn't erased me. I left the key on the kitchen counter. Not with drama. Just with certainty. Then I closed the door behind me and didn't look back. Because there was nothing left inside that could hold me. Nothing except walls. And even those had stopped protecting anything worth saving. But I wasn't done yet. There was one last thing I needed to say. And not to them. Sometimes healing doesn't feel like forgiveness. It feels like walking away without needing to explain why. I didn't go back to the house after that. Not once. Not even when James gently asked if I wanted to sort through the attic boxes, or when the lawyer sent a polite follow-up reminding me that personal items technically remained unclaimed. I let it all stay there: old trophies, forgotten sweaters, even the piano books I used to trace with my fingertips before I knew how to read the notes. None of it belonged to me anymore. Not really. What mattered was already carried with me. And what didn't, I no longer wanted to carry. Life didn't change overnight. But something in me did. I stopped expecting things to be fair. I stopped apologizing in advance for making people uncomfortable. And I stopped performing the version of daughter they preferred: a woman who smiled through erasure, who kept her voice soft when being dismissed, who let her name be penciled in, then rubbed out like an afterthought. The funny thing about that kind of silence is how loud it gets over time. I could hear it echo now. I just didn't answer anymore. James and I moved to a new apartment. Not far. Just enough to feel fresh. It had high ceilings and pale hardwood floors that clicked softly under my heels in the morning. The sun came in sideways through the kitchen blinds. Every detail felt intentional, not inherited. One morning, while unpacking the last of the office boxes, I found the red folder again. Still neat. Still weighty. Still exactly as I left it. I sat on the floor and opened it slowly. There was no urgency. No heat. Just memory. I flipped through the marked pages, the timestamps, the crisp legal notes and quiet betrayals. I read the line that started it all: Emily better positioned to maintain reputation, and for the first time, it didn't make me flinch. It made me think. They were wrong. Reputation isn't about perception. It's about legacy. And my legacy would not be silence. 2 weeks later, I gave a talk at a small business symposium downtown. Nothing flashy. Just a 20-minute panel on ethical succession in family-owned enterprises. Clara sat in the second row, nodding. Afterward, someone from the back asked a question. What happens when trust breaks inside a family firm? How do you repair it? I took a breath. Then I said. Sometimes you don't. You just build something else. Something better. From the pieces they thought were useless. The room was quiet. But not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes after truth. A month later, I got a letter. typed, signed, and strangely formal. It was from my father. No apology. Just a series of facts. Emily has stepped back from the board. Your reinstatement is final. The succession clause has been amended once again, this time in your favor. He ended it with, "We trust your judgment." I folded the letter and placed it in the back of the red folder. I didn't smile. But something inside me loosened. Not because I wanted his approval, but because it no longer defined me. I haven't spoken to Emily since the confrontation. She lives in another city now. New apartment, new circle, new brand. Every once in a while, someone sends me a link to one of her posts. She still writes long captions about forgiveness and energy and boundaries. I don't read them anymore. Not because I'm bitter. Because I'm done looking for honesty in places that built themselves on performance. My mother texted on my birthday. Just one sentence, "Thinking of you." I didn't respond. Not to punish her, but because she never really saw me. And I've stopped asking to be seen by people who look away when it matters. James and I took another trip to the coast. Same stretch of beach, different rental. We sat on the porch again, wrapped in blankets, sipping something warm. He said, "Do you ever miss them?" I replied, "I miss the version I used to believe in." He nodded. Said nothing else. He understood. There are some wounds that don't close. But they stop bleeding. And that, too, is healing. I started writing more. Not books. Not essays. Just thoughts. Small truths scribbled in the quiet between meetings or while tea steeped. One morning, I wrote this. They took my name out of the documents. But I rewrote the story. And this time I didn't ask for a signature. That night, I sat by the window, red folder open in my lap. I pulled out the letter. The original draft. The timestamped transfer. Then I fed each page, one by one, into the shredder. It didn't feel dramatic. It felt complete. I don't know if they'll ever understand what they did. But I no longer need them to. Because I know who I am now. And I don't measure that by inheritance, approval, or proximity to legacy. I measure it by this. I told the truth when it cost me everything. And I stood up. Even when they expected me to disappear. And I didn't. I never will.